I used to think my sons loved me equally. I used to believe they respected each other the way brothers should. But the truth is, you never really know someone's heart until there's something to fight over. My name is Robert Hale. I built my company from the ground up, a freight and logistics empire that started with a single truck and a dream. 40 years later, that dream had turned into a fleet, contracts across the state, and a reputation that carried my name. I always imagined handing it down one day. Not selling. Not merging. Passing it to the next generation, to my sons, Michael and Daniel. Michael, my oldest, was the golden boy. Polished. Confident. The kind of man who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with everyone's names memorized and 3 new contracts in his pocket. He dressed sharp, spoke well, and had an answer for everything. People trusted him. Daniel, my youngest, was different. Quieter. More methodical. Where Michael excelled at charm, Daniel excelled at details. He was the one who could look at a logistics schedule and find the one weak link that would cost us a client. He didn't need the spotlight, or so I thought. To anyone looking from the outside, they were a perfect team. They spoke respectfully to each other in meetings, offered help when the other was busy, even joked about who would get the corner office someday. But as a father, I could feel something under the surface. A certain stiffness in their smiles. A hesitation in their handshakes. And if I'm honest, a flicker in their eyes whenever the word inheritance came up. It's a strange thing, building something over a lifetime and realizing it might not unite your family, but divide it. There were moments, small ones, that planted the seed of doubt in me. Like last summer, when I was recovering from a minor surgery. Michael stopped by every day, but always with one eye on his phone, checking emails, asking questions about which clients he could handle in my absence. Daniel came by less often, but when he did, he stayed longer, yet always found a way to ask about the company finances before leaving. Or the time they both offered to help at the same trade conference, each insisting they didn't mind going alone, if I preferred. It was framed as convenience, but it felt like competition. Still, I told myself I was imagining it. Until the night of my 68th birthday. We were having dinner at my house, just the 3 of us. The food was good, the wine was flowing, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that we were simply father and sons, enjoying a meal without the shadow of the company between us. Then Michael raised his glass and said, "To Dad, the best boss I've ever had, and hopefully the one who leaves me the keys someday." He was smiling, but it wasn't a joke. Daniel's smile froze. "Us," he corrected. "Leaves us the keys." Michael chuckled, swirling his wine. "Sure. Us." It was a moment that passed quickly on the surface, but it stuck with me. Because in that tiny pause, I saw something dangerous. Ambition, sharper than brotherhood. And I knew I had to find out, once and for all, where their loyalty truly lay. By the 3rd week, the air between my sons had shifted from polite frost to thin ice. They still smiled in meetings, still addressed each other as brother, but every exchange was lined with barbs so fine you could miss them if you weren't listening for tone. I listened for tone. I didn't need to dig for proof. The signs walked themselves into my office. One morning, HR brought me a driver's resignation letter. "I'm tired of playing pawn in a family game," it read. The driver didn't name names, but the implication was clear. The leadership tension wasn't just leaking, it was spilling into the ranks. That same day, dispatch reported a miscommunication between ops and sales on a high-profile shipment for a new tech client. Michael had promised a 2-day turnaround without checking capacity. Daniel had rerouted half the fleet to cover an urgent government contract. The client was caught in the middle and furious. We ate a penalty fee that could have paid 3 drivers for a month. At lunch, I walked past the break room and caught the tail end of a conversation. Michael's voice, low but heated. "If he thinks he's going to play hero with that government deal, fine. Let him drown in the paperwork." Daniel's reply was just as cold. "Better paperwork than empty promises you can't deliver." Neither noticed me in the doorway. I left without interrupting. Tests are useless if you tip the subject off. It wasn't just work. Even small gestures were calculated now. When Daniel sent coffee to sales after a long week, Michael sent pastries to ops the next morning. Both were appreciation. Both came with handwritten notes. Both were signed only with their own names. The team wasn't our team anymore. It was my people and his people. Employees started choosing sides, sometimes openly, sometimes with a raised eyebrow or a seat taken on one side of the lunch table. I'd seen office politics before, but never in my own house. And make no mistake, the company was my house. Watching it split down the middle was like watching someone pull bricks from the foundation. By the start of the 4th week, I noticed something else. They'd both started performing for me. Michael made sure I overheard him praising Daniel's efficiency to a client on the phone, just loud enough that I'd know he was the bigger man. Daniel conveniently dropped his schedule in front of me so I'd see he'd blocked time for joint planning sessions with sales. Neither gesture rang true. Both felt like attempts to build a narrative for the judge they thought I'd become. It was working in a way. I was the judge. But I wasn't looking for the most polished defense. I was watching for the moment when one of them would forget about optics and show me the truth. It came on a Thursday night. I'd stayed late, reviewing fleet maintenance budgets. The building was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock above my office door. Around 8:45 I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the operations wing. Peeking out, I saw Daniel in the dim hallway, checking office doors. He stopped at Michael's, tried the handle, and stepped inside. I moved closer, silent. From the crack in the doorway, I saw him open Michael's filing cabinet, rifle through a stack of folders, then take photos with his phone. It lasted less than 2 minutes. He closed everything neatly, left no trace, and walked out without a sound. I stayed where I was until the echo of his steps faded. Then I went into Michael's office myself. The folder Daniel had touched was labeled Stanton Steel, Renewals. The next morning, Michael came in later than usual, carrying a cardboard box of marketing samples. He passed my door without stopping, but his eyes flicked toward me, just once, just long enough to register. At noon, my assistant told me Michael had requested a private meeting. When he sat down, he leaned back in the chair like he was trying to appear relaxed. "I'm not here to make accusations," he began, which is what people say right before making one. "But I think Daniel's been digging into accounts that aren't his territory. Particularly Stanton Steel. I'd hate for any misunderstanding to cause problems with them." I asked him if he had proof. He said no, but the way he said it, smooth, measured, told me he believed I'd fill in the blanks myself. I didn't answer. I let the silence do the work. Michael filled it by offering to take over a few of Daniel's more delicate accounts, just to ease his load. It was a beautiful performance. And I'd seen the rehearsal the night before. By week 6, the sabotage was open enough to taste. Ops delayed paperwork for sales deals by accident. Sales booked promotional rates Ops couldn't meet. Clients started asking me directly if everything was all right at the top. I told them yes. My voice didn't even shake. The irony was that their moves hurt both of them equally. The numbers were slipping on both sides. The only real winner was the lesson I was collecting. The final straw came in the 2nd month. A major client, Easton Freight, called me about a bid Michael had submitted. The price was high, too high. I checked the file. The cost sheet was wrong, bloated with line items that didn't belong. Not Michael's style, unless he'd been given the wrong numbers to start with. When I asked Daniel for the original cost sheet, he couldn't find it. A week later, it turned up in the copier room trash, crumpled but legible. The handwriting in the margin was Daniel's. I didn't confront him. I didn't confront either of them. Because the point wasn't to stop the fire. The point was to see how far they'd let it burn. By the end of month 3, I had my answer. The once smooth operation was limping. 2 clients had walked. Employee morale was the lowest I'd seen in 20 years. And my sons, my blood, were barely speaking except through intermediaries. I set the meeting for Friday morning. My office. No assistants, no phones, no excuses. Michael arrived first, dressed sharp, eyes alert. Daniel came in a minute later carrying a leather-bound planner, his mouth a straight line. They sat across from each other, the desk between them feeling like a border wall. I placed 2 folders on the desk. One said Will, Michael. The other said Will, Daniel. They both stared. This is what you saw, I said. Each of you. At different times. Each of you thought the other was the chosen heir. Michael's face went hard. Daniel's eyes narrowed. It was a test. I continued. Not of your skill. Not of your charm. Not of your numbers. Of your loyalty, to each other, and to this company. I leaned forward. You both failed. They shifted in their chairs, but neither spoke. In 3 months, you've taken a stable, respected company and dragged it into the mud. You've treated each other like enemies. You've put your pride above the business, above our people, above the family. I let the silence hang until it became heavy. That's why, starting Monday, either of you will be running this company. 2 sets of eyes widened. I opened a 3rd folder and slid it forward. This is the new CEO, effective immediately. Someone who's been loyal, competent, and steady for years. Someone who didn't need to tear anyone down to stand tall. The name was printed in clean black ink, Elaine Porter. My operations director. The one person both my sons had underestimated. You'll each get a 10% stake in the profits, I said. Enough to remind you where you came from. Not enough to control what you never earned. Michael started to speak, but I raised a hand. Daniel's jaw worked, but no words came. I'm still your father, I said, standing. But you're no longer my successors. I walked out, leaving them in my office, the sound of my steps the only thing breaking the silence. Because sometimes, the cruelest thing you can do to someone is let them sit with the weight of what they've lost. When you take something from a man that he's spent his life expecting to receive, the first thing you see is not sadness. It's disbelief. Michael and Daniel didn't crumble in my office that day, they froze. Like statues waiting for someone to tell them the pose was over. I didn't wait. I walked out, shut the door, and left them alone with the echo. That night, I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to the edge of town where the old trucking yard used to be, the one where I'd parked my first rig 42 years ago. The yard was empty now, weeds curling up through the cracked asphalt, the chain-link fence leaning like an old man who's been standing too long. I sat in the truck with the engine off and thought about the boys when they were little. How Michael used to sit in the cab with me, pretending to shift gears. How Daniel would draw maps of delivery routes with crayons, insisting we follow them exactly. Back then, they didn't care who owned what. They just wanted to be close to their dad. Somewhere between then and now, the company stopped being something we shared, and became something they fought over. I knew I'd done the right thing. But right doesn't mean painless. Monday morning came. Elaine Porter walked into the building not as my operations director, but as the new CEO. She's a sharp woman, level-headed, unshakable in a crisis, with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to shout to be heard. I'd chosen her because she'd always put the company first, even when it cost her personally. She called the department heads into the main conference room. I stayed in my office, but I could hear her voice through the half-open door, steady, clear, no theatrics. She outlined the changes she'd be making immediately, clarifying decision rights, streamlining reporting, reinforcing the company's core values. And then she said the thing that told me I'd made the right call. This company is not a prize to be won. It's a responsibility to be honored. I glanced toward the glass wall and saw Michael and Daniel sitting side by side, their arms crossed, their faces blank. The next few weeks were quiet. Not in the way I liked. Michael came in late, left early. He stopped wearing the sharp suits, settling for pressed shirts with no tie, as though he was on autopilot. Daniel buried himself in busy work, running reports no one asked for, attending meetings without speaking. They didn't argue anymore. But they didn't talk either. The tension between them had gone from open war to cold exile. I caught them once in the break room together. They stood at opposite ends of the counter, each pouring coffee, either acknowledging the other. The silence between them was so thick, even the hum of the refrigerator felt loud. It wasn't just them who had changed. The staff was different too. Without the brothers' tug-of-war, people seemed relieved, like the air had cleared. Productivity started climbing back up. Clients who'd been on the fence renewed their contracts. A few even called me personally to say they were glad Elaine was at the helm. That stung a little, if I'm honest. It reminded me that the company's success was bigger than any one person, even me. Still, the brothers didn't adjust. I'd expected anger, maybe even confrontation. But what I got was worse: detachment. They came in, did the bare minimum, collected their profit shares, and left. One Friday afternoon, I found Daniel sitting in the parking lot in his car long after work ended. I tapped on the window. He rolled it down, eyes tired. "You all right?" I asked. "Fine," he said, staring straight ahead. "Just thinking about what's next." "For you?" I said. He nodded. "Yeah. For me." Michael's version came a week later, over lunch. He stirred his drink with the straw, not looking at me. 10% profit share is generous," he said. "But it's not enough to build anything new." "Maybe that's the point," I told him. He gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "We'll see." The warning signs started small. A missed check-in here. A vague business trip there. Elaine mentioned in passing that both brothers had been making calls to some of our competitors. Not overt, not obvious, but exploratory. I wasn't surprised. If you take the crown away, a man will go looking for another kingdom. But I didn't expect what came next. It was late on a Tuesday when Elaine came into my office, closing the door behind her. "We have a problem," she said, setting a folder on my desk. Inside were copies of 2 proposals, one from Michael, one from Daniel, both offering consulting services to the same rival freight company in the next county. Neither proposal mentioned their connection to each other, or to me. "They're competing against each other," Elaine said quietly. "Outside our walls now." I leaned back in my chair. It wasn't anger I felt. It was a kind of weary resignation. They hadn't learned a thing. "They'll burn themselves out," I said. "Or," Elaine countered, "they'll build something big enough to come back for this company in a few years." That made me sit up. Because if there's one thing more dangerous than brothers fighting inside the house, it's brothers fighting outside the house, aiming back in. That night, I lay awake replaying the last few months. I'd set the test to protect the company from exactly this kind of ego-driven leadership. But in doing so, I might have set them on a path where the company would be their target, not their inheritance. I had stopped them once. Could I stop them again? And the bigger question, did I even want to, if it meant spending the rest of my years guarding the gates against my own blood? The next morning, I got my answer in the form of a text from an old contact at a regional shipping association. "You might want to know, your boys were at the annual mixer last night. Together. Pitching something." It wasn't the fact they were pitching that got me. It was the word, together. After months of icy silence, Michael and Daniel had found common ground again. And if history was any teacher, that common ground would be built on a mutual goal, one that probably had my name on it. I stared at that text for a long time. If my test had taught me anything, it was that when my sons joined forces, they could be unstoppable. And for the first time since handing the company to Elaine, I felt the old hum of risk in my veins. Because maybe the real battle hadn't even started yet. It had been almost 6 months since I stepped down as CEO. 6 months since I'd watched my sons tear at each other until there was nothing left worth inheriting. 6 months since I'd handed the keys to Elaine and told myself the worst was behind us. I was wrong. The first real sign came at a quarterly industry conference in the city. I wasn't on the speaker list this year, but Elaine was, so I tagged along, content to play the role of retired founder, shaking hands, swapping stories, pretending not to notice the way younger CEOs glanced past me toward her. During the afternoon networking break, I spotted them. Michael and Daniel. Together. Not in the stiff, keep your distance way I'd seen in recent months. No, this was different. They were shoulder to shoulder, leaning in toward a man I recognized, Carl Dempsey, owner of a mid-sized freight company just over the county line. Carl was laughing, nodding, gesturing with his coffee cup. Michael was doing most of the talking, Daniel occasionally chiming in with a statistic or an observation. From a distance, it looked like a pitch. From experience, I knew it was a pitch. I didn't approach them. Instead, I found a spot near the tall windows and watched as they worked the room, together, moving from one cluster of executives to another. Michael handled introductions, Daniel closed with data. It was seamless, efficient, and unsettling. I'd seen that partnership before. Once, it had been in service to my company. Now, I had no idea what it was serving. Elaine noticed too. That night, over dinner, she asked, "Did you see your sons today?" "I did," I said carefully. "They're building something," she said. "I don't know what yet, but they're talking to the right people, and the right people are listening." I thought about the folder she'd shown me weeks ago, the consulting proposals to a rival. "They could be making side deals," I offered. Elaine shook her head. "This feels bigger. More structured. And I don't like structured when it's coming from two men who think they've been wronged." 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with another tip, this time from a supplier we'd used for years. "Robert, just a heads up," he said. "Your boys reached out. Wanted to know if I'd be willing to switch my contract if they could offer me better rates through their new venture." "New venture?" I repeated. That's what they called it. Hale Brothers Logistics. The name hit me like a fist. They weren't hiding. They were advertising. I drove to Daniel's place that night. It was late, but his lights were still on. He answered the door in jeans and a t-shirt, clearly not expecting company. "Dad," he said, surprised. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside. I walked into his living room and saw blueprints on the coffee table, not building plans, but operational flowcharts. Routes, driver schedules, cost analyses. "So it's true," I said, gesturing toward the papers. "Hale Brothers Logistics." Daniel didn't flinch. "It's nothing personal." I laughed once, short and humorless. "That's the first lie you've told tonight." He sat down, running a hand over his face. "Look, Dad, you made your choice. You put Elaine in charge. You gave us scraps. We're not sitting around waiting for a bigger handout. We're building our own." "With your brother," I said. "With my brother," he confirmed. "Turns out we work well together when we're not fighting over your approval." That stung more than I cared to admit. I left without an argument. But I didn't sleep that night. Because here's the thing, in this industry, reputation is everything. Hale is a name people trust. It's why my contracts held for decades, even when rates weren't the lowest. My sons were about to use that name, our name, to compete with me. And they weren't starting from scratch. They had my contacts, my playbook, my blood. Elaine called a strategy meeting the next day. She laid it out plain. "They're going after our clients. Not all at once, strategically. Picking the ones most likely to defect. If we don't get ahead of this, they could carve out 20% of our revenue in a year. Let them try," I said, more bravely than I felt. She gave me a long look. "You didn't see them together at the mixer, did you? They're dangerous when they're united. You taught them how to win, Robert. You just never thought they'd use it against you." She wasn't wrong. Over the next month, the pattern became clear. Hale Brothers Logistics wasn't a rumor anymore, it was a reality. They launched quietly but targeted hard. Former employees of mine were now on their payroll. clients I'd known for decades were exploring other options. I could have fought back publicly, filed for trademark disputes, leveraged supplier contracts, even gone to court over non-compete clauses. But those moves would have made it a war in full view of the industry. Wars have casualties. I wasn't ready to burn my own name to scorch theirs. Not yet. Instead, I decided to wait. To watch. To let them believe they were building unchecked. Because if my sons had taught me anything over the years, it's that ambition unchecked eventually exposes its own weaknesses. The question was, when it did, would I be ready to exploit them? One evening, about 3 months into their operation, I got another call. It was from Carl Dempsey, the man I'd seen them talking to at the conference. "Robert," he said, "thought you should know, your boys just underbid me on a regional contract. Beat my numbers by 15%. I'm out." That number hit me. 15% was aggressive, too aggressive. If they kept offering rates that low, they'd bleed cash before the year was out. And that was the first crack. I hung up and smiled to myself. Because maybe, just maybe, the brothers were setting themselves up for a fall. And I knew exactly how to help gravity along. The moment Carl told me about the 15% underbid, the old part of my brain, the part that had fought for every inch of this business in its early days, flicked on like a light switch. 15% wasn't innovation. It was desperation dressed as confidence. And desperation, in business, is a wound you can exploit. I didn't rush. The first rule of a quiet counterattack is patience. You don't swing wild. You watch the target breathe, learn the rhythm, and strike where it hurts most without leaving fingerprints. The first thing I did was call in a few favors. Old drivers I trusted, retired dispatchers who still had ears in the industry. I wanted eyes on Hale Brothers logistics, their routes, their clients, their hiring patterns. Within a week, I had my first gift. They were overextending. They'd landed 3 big contracts in different regions, and instead of pacing themselves, they threw everything at fulfilling them at once. Trucks were running long hauls without rest cycles. Maintenance was slipping. A single breakdown could snowball into late deliveries, and late deliveries meant penalties. Elaine was the one who gave me the second gift. "They're poaching aggressively," she told me over coffee. "But they're not checking histories. One of the dispatchers they just hired got fired from here for fudging shipment weights. If she's still sloppy, it'll catch up to them." I smiled. If it's going to catch up to them, maybe we can give it a little push. We didn't sabotage anything, not directly. That wasn't my style. But we did make sure certain clients with very specific expectations found their way into the Hale Brothers pipeline. Clients known for changing delivery specs last minute. Clients who docked payment for even minor errors. Clients who could turn a profitable route into a loss in a heartbeat. And every time one of those clients complained to me about the new guys, I listened sympathetically, as though I had nothing to do with the introduction. The cracks widened fast. A month in, my contact at the port called. "Robert, your boys' trucks have been sitting in Bay 3 for 6 hours. Customs paperwork was incomplete. That's going to cost them." 2 weeks later, Carl called again. They tried underbidding on another contract. Won it. Lost it within 2 months when they couldn't meet volume. That kind of turnover's going to start sticking to their name. I wasn't celebrating yet. Because I knew Michael and Daniel. They were stubborn enough to push through pain if they thought the payoff was worth it. The trick was to make the pain compound faster than they could patch it. So I set up a meeting with an old industry friend, Linda Myers, who ran a mid-tier freight company. I pitched her on a short-term partnership with my firm, not to expand our capacity, but to offer overflow support to Hale Brothers when they inevitably overbooked. "Why would they come to us?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. "Because I'll make sure no one else says yes," I said. "And when they do come to us, we'll give them terms that look like a lifeline but cost them more than they realize." Linda raised an eyebrow. "You're playing a long game." I nodded. "The only game worth playing." By the end of the second quarter, The Hale brothers were showing visible strain. The sleek branding and confident pitches were still there, but the edges were fraying. Turnover was up. A couple of their high-profile clients had quietly slipped back to us. I ran into Daniel at a fuel station one afternoon. He was behind the wheel of one of their rigs, sleeves rolled up, a smudge of grease on his arm. "Thought you had drivers for that," I said, nodding toward the truck. He gave a tired smile. "We do. Just covering a gap." A gap. That was his word for it. I knew better. Gaps turn into canyons if you don't bridge them fast. Then came the rumor, the one I'd been waiting for. Word spread that a major investor they'd been courting was reconsidering, after reviewing their last 2 quarters' numbers. No one would say why, but I didn't have to ask. Numbers don't lie. That was the moment I knew they'd either come to me, or go down swinging. 2 weeks later, I got my answer. It was late evening when my phone rang. Michael's number. "Dad," he said, his voice controlled but thinner than usual. "Daniel and I need to talk to you. In person." "When?" "Tonight." I agreed. Not because I wanted to gloat, but because in that instant, I realized my sons weren't just in trouble. They were coming to me as a united front. And united, my sons were either a force to rebuild, or a storm to destroy. When they arrived, they didn't waste time. Michael spoke first. "We know you've had a hand in this," he said. "Maybe not directly. But things have been lining up in a way that doesn't feel accidental." Daniel leaned forward. "We're not here to accuse. We're here to offer something. Hale brothers could fold in a year, maybe less, if things keep going like this. Or? I asked. "Or we merge," Daniel said. "You, us, the company. Not as heirs. As partners." I sat back, weighing the words. They thought they were offering me a gift. What they didn't realize was that the gift was already mine. I looked at my sons sitting across from me, older than the boys I'd once carried on my shoulders, yet in this moment they seemed younger somehow. Not because of their faces, but because of what I saw in their eyes. Desperation. Not the kind that makes you reckless. The kind that makes you willing to bargain. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly, leaning back in my chair. "You want to merge Hale Brothers Logistics with my company. Equal partners." Michael nodded. Daniel stayed quiet, watching me the way you watch a dealer in a poker game, trying to guess the next card. "Why?" I asked. Daniel sighed. "Because the alternative is folding. And folding means losing everything we've built." "You've built?" I raised an eyebrow. "Or everything I built that you tried to take?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Dad, we can stand here all night rehashing the past, or we can move forward. We're offering to combine forces. We bring in new clients, younger leadership, fresh branding. You bring stability. Infrastructure. The name." I almost laughed. The name, as though it hadn't been mine from the start. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable. I wanted them to feel the weight of this moment, to know it wasn't just a business transaction. It was an acknowledgement of who really held the cards. Finally I said, "I'll consider it. But there would be conditions." Michael leaned forward. "Name them." "Condition 1, no equal partnership. I would retain 60% controlling interest in the merged company. They would split the remaining 40% between them. Condition 2, they would have operational titles, vice presidents, but no unilateral authority to sign contracts, hire executives, or alter company policy without my or the CEO's approval. Condition 3, the brand would remain my company's name, not theirs. Hale Brothers Logistics would be absorbed completely, its assets, clients, and staff integrated under my banner. Condition 4, for the first 3 years, their profit draws would be tied directly to performance metrics, not flat percentages. If they performed poorly, they'd earn less. Michael frowned. "So we'd be employees. You'd be leaders who answered to someone," I corrected. "Same as anyone else here." The difference is, you'll be answering to me. Daniel glanced at his brother, then back at me. And if we say no? I didn't blink. Then you walk out of here tonight, and in 6 months, Hale Brothers will be a line item in someone else's bankruptcy ledger. Your choice. They didn't answer right away. Michael looked like he was weighing pride against survival. Daniel looked like he'd already made up his mind. Finally, Daniel spoke. We'll do it. Michael hesitated another beat before nodding. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the desk. Then welcome back to the family business. Such as it is. The paperwork took 2 weeks. Elaine oversaw the integration with surgical precision. Trucks were rebranded. Client accounts were merged. Some of their staff stayed, others didn't. Within a month, Hale Brothers Logistics was gone, except for the 2 men who'd started it, now sitting in my boardroom, wearing my company's badges. I didn't humiliate them in public. That wasn't the goal. Outwardly, the story was one of strategic consolidation, 2 sides coming together to strengthen market position. Industry journals even called it a savvy move by the Hale family. Inside, everyone knew the truth. They hadn't merged with me. They'd been absorbed. In the months that followed, Michael and Daniel did their jobs. Not spectacularly, not poorly, just well enough to keep their seats. I gave them space, but I also kept them on a short leash. Any big idea they had went through me. Any contract they wanted required my signature. At first, they resisted. Michael pushed for more autonomy. Daniel asked for higher profit draws. Each time, I reminded them of the terms. Each time, they backed down. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about teaching them something I should have taught them years ago. That leadership isn't about taking the crown. It's about earning the right to wear it. One evening, nearly a year after the merger, Daniel stopped by my office. You know, he said, leaning against the doorway, if you'd just given us the company in the first place, none of this would have happened. I set down my pen. You're wrong. It would have happened faster. And you'd have destroyed it before you knew how to save it. He didn't argue. He just nodded once and left. Looking back, I realized something. The test I'd set up all those months ago, the fake wills, the competition, it hadn't failed. It had worked exactly as intended. I'd seen their true colors, and I'd acted before they could burn down what I'd built. Now they were part of the machine again. Not because they'd earned it, but because I'd allowed it. I drove home that night with the windows down, the cool air carrying the scent of diesel and asphalt, the smell of my life's work. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder about the future of the company. Because the future was mine.